Welcome to our decimals flipped video. If you have any questions, you can talk to myself or Mrs. Drake if you need any help. Let's get started. So, decimals. What is a decimal? A decimal represents a number that is a part of a whole. And we've talked about this before because we've talked about fractions, and fractions represent part of a whole number. So it's not whole numbers, it's part of a whole number. Think of it like sharing with your friends. How can you relate decimals to base 10 blocks? So if we were talking base 10, these would be considered rods, and you would call them tens. But with decimals, we are no longer talking about this side of the decimal point. We are now talking about this side of the decimal point. So now we're moving to the right of the decimal, not to the left of the decimal. So I have 1, because this is a whole rectangle. I have one part of that whole rectangle filled in, and it's 1 out of 10 pieces. So if I'm representing this shaded in blue part, that would be 1/10. So here's my decimal point. To the right of my decimal, that is going to be 1/10. If I'm talking about numbers to the left, then I'm talking about whole numbers. These are parts of a whole. So 1/10, that is part of a whole. So 1 out of 10 pieces are shaded in. Now, let's talk about this. This is 100 pieces. And if you look, 1 out of 100 are filled in. So if I go back over here and I look, these again are whole numbers. These are parts of a whole. I have 1 out of 100 filled in. I knew that this spot right here from the previous example, that's a tenth. I have 0/10 filled in. So these would be like those little ones that we're talking about. And how many of these little ones do I have filled in? Well, I have 1 of them. But they're not called ones when we're talking about parts of a whole. When we're talking about decimals, that is called 1/100th. So 1 out of 100 is filled in. 1/100th. I don't have any tenths filled in, so I have just 1/100th filled in. Let's look at some more. Back to my tenths. My decimal point, I'm talking about parts of this whole rectangle, so I'm talking about everything to the right of the decimal. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4 tenths filled in. Now I can also represent it as a fraction. Since we've been talking about fractions, I could say 4 out of the 10 pieces are filled in. So that would be 4/10. 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 10. 4/10, 4/10. And it's 4 out of 10, so it's still going to have that tenths sound in it. Let's look at this one. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I have 8/10, and if I'm representing that as a fraction, it would be 8 out of 10. So that's 8/10. And if I were to write it in written form, it would say 8/10, 8 out of 10. Everything to the right of the decimal is a part of a whole. It's not a whole number, it's a part of a whole number. Now I'm going to include a whole number in here because I have one whole rectangle filled in. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8/10. Okay, so that's one whole and 8/10 is filled in. Let's go back to our hundredths now. Okay, so now I've got to figure out how many hundredths I have filled in. If you look though, this right here is really considered a tenth. So it's either 1/10 or 10 hundredths. Let me go back a little bit. I can represent this as 1/10, or I can represent it as this, because that would be 10 hundredths. If I broke all of this up into 100 pieces, there would be 10 of them. So there'd be 10 hundredths, or just 1/10. You can also represent it that way also. So let's look at this. Each one of these is either 1/10 or 10 hundredths. But since we have it broken into 100 pieces, let's count. I have 10 hundredths, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. So I have 74 hundredths filled in. 7 full tenths are filled in because there's a 7 in the tenths place, and 4 hundredths. So 74 hundredths, and I can write that as a fraction also, as 74 out of 100 pieces are shaded in. Again, we're not talking about base 10. It kind of looks like base 10, but we're really talking about how we're representing this part of a whole rectangle. Let's look at this one. How many tenths do I have filled in? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 tenths, which is the same as 40 hundredths. So 4 tenths or 40 hundredths, 41, 42, 43, 44. So this is going to be 44 hundredths. 44 out of 100 pieces are shaded in, and I could write it as a fraction too, because 44 out of 100 are shaded in. 4 tenths and these 4 hundredths. Let's look now. I'm going to start representing a whole number, which is represented by the green, and a part of a whole, which is going to be my decimal, which is represented by the red. So I have one whole, and I have 1, 2, 3, so that'd be 30 hundredths. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38. So this is one whole and 38 hundredths. One whole, 38 hundredths, okay? It's not 1.38, it's one whole and 38 hundredths. So please watch this video multiple times so that you can get an understanding of how to represent decimals. Decimals are not whole numbers, they are parts of a whole. So I just want you to make sure that you watch this video over and over again and see how to represent decimals and get the vocabulary of the hundredths place, which is right here, and the tenths place, which is right here. So watch this multiple times. Make sure you fill in your vocabulary on your recording sheet and do your practice problems, and we will talk about this some more whenever we get to class.